countries supporting Assad.
To Iran and to Russia, I ask, what kind of a nation wants to be associated with the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children?
Nikki Haley, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, live, only on Fox News Sunday. Then the FBI raids the president's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, raising questions whether Mr. Trump will fire Special Counsel Robert Mueller.
Why don't I just fire Mueller? Well, I think it's a disgrace what's going on. We'll see what happens.
We'll discuss the latest developments with Congressman Trey Gowdy, chair of the House Oversight Committee. Plus, former FBI Director James Comey's new book lashes out at President Trump, and the White House responds.
The intelligence community does intelligence, the White House does PR and spin.
Comey will be forever known as a disgraced partisan hack that broke his sacred trust with the President of the United States.
We'll ask our Sunday panel if there are bombshells in the new book or just a political food fight. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The strikes on Syria by the U.S., France, and Britain are a show of Western resolve meant to punish Bashar al-Assad for his latest chemical weapons attack on his own people. The Pentagon describes the strikes on 3 targets as precise, overwhelming, and effective. But what happens if Assad uses chemical weapons again? And where does this leave U.S. policy for dealing with the civil war and terror threat in Syria? In a moment, we'll speak live with the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. But first, National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin with the latest on the military operation.
Over 100 U.S., French, and British missiles all hit their targets, successfully landing simultaneously within just a few minutes, despite being launched from military assets deployed from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf.
Clearly, the Assad regime did not get the message last year. This time, our allies and we have struck harder.
The 3 targets included a research center near Damascus, a chemical weapons storage facility near Homs, and a weapons bunker a few miles from that second site. Russian and Syrian state media claim they shot down dozens of the Allied Tomahawks and missiles, but the Pentagon says the Russian guns remained silent, adding Syria fired 40 surface-to-air missiles wildly into the air after the U.S. missiles had already hit.
What happens next has everything to do with what the Assad regime decides to do.
I spoke to the president this morning, and he said if the Syrian regime uses this poisonous gas again, the United States is locked and loaded. When our president draws a red line, our president enforces the red line.
U.S. intelligence has only concluded at this time that chlorine was used in the most recent chemical attack. They suspect sarin, but don't have the proof yet, leaving many to wonder if use of chlorine bombs in Syria is a new red line for the U.S. and its allies, and the possibility of future military actions. Chris.
Jennifer, thank you. Joining us now from New York, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Ambassador, I want to start with President Trump's tweet after the military action against Syria. Here it is. A perfectly executed strike last night. Could not have had a better result. Mission accomplished. A lot of people say that echoes President Bush 43's premature claim of mission accomplished back in 2003. Isn't President Trump's claim of success just as premature?
Well, first of all, mission accomplished is a military term, and as a military spouse, I know that mission accomplished means you have one task currently in front of you, and when it's completed, it is mission accomplished. Politically, mission accomplished means something broader, and I think that the president was referring in military terms. We, of course, know that our work in Syria is not done. We know that it is now up to Bashar al-Assad on whether he's going to use chemical weapons again, and should he use it again, the president has made it very very clear that the United States is locked and loaded and ready to go.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that because obviously you have no idea how Assad is going to respond to this attack, although I suspect you think that he got the message. And to add a little bit to this confusion, President Trump and Defense Secretary Mattis sent very different signals on Friday night about the campaign. Take a look at both of them.
We are prepared to sustain this response until the Syrian regime stops its use of prohibited chemical agents.
Right now, this is a one-time shot.
So which is it, a one-time shot or a sustained response?
That is totally up to Assad. What I can tell you is the president has made it very clear that when it comes to weapons of mass destruction, we have no tolerance for it. We are going to watch out for the best interests of the American people. And so he made a point, and hopefully Assad gets it. If Assad doesn't get it, it's going to hurt. And I think what General Mattis was saying was these strikes happened basically responding to their continued use of chemical weapons. But of course, if Assad continues to go forward, there will be more, and it will hurt. And I think that he has a lot to think about.
I want to pick up on that because there are certainly indications since the first strike in April of last year that Assad had used chemical weapons and there had been no U.S. response. This particular case last weekend was especially egregious and horrific. But are you saying that going forward that any use of chemical weapons by Assad will trigger an immediate U.S. response?
Well, I think, first of all, you said it. This last one was egregious. It was barbaric, and it was disgusting. And so I think what you saw was there had been a cumulative wave of constant use of chemical weapons. Assad knew that Russia had his back. Assad knew that Russia would cover for him at the United Nations, and Assad got reckless, and he used it in a way that was far more aggressive. We have to be very conscious of the fact that we can't allow even the smallest use of chemical weapons. That's why you saw the president strike this past weekend. That's why you saw him expel 60 Russian spies after the attack in Salisbury. This very easily could happen in the United States if we're not smart and if we're not conscious of what's happening. And so this was a message sent to Assad. We'll see how smart he is.
But to press my point, if I may, are you saying that going forward there is zero tolerance? Any use by Assad of chemical weapons will trigger a military response?
Well, I don't think there's any way that I can answer that. I mean, we don't know what he's going to do, the level he's going to do, or anything else. I will tell you that the president's watching, and I think the national security team is ready. So basically, we will watch his actions. He now dictates his life, and he dictates what happens between the United States, our allies, and his regime. And so hopefully he's gotten the message. It was a pretty strong message. Not only did we go after their absolute strongest research facility, we went after their storage units where they hold the products, and we went after their production. So we put a heavy blow into their chemical weapons program, setting them back years, and I'm sure that it's going to take them a lot to recover from it.
Ambassador, here's a question that a lot of people have. You have spoken very movingly about the slaughter of civilians in Syria, and we are seeing pictures right now of the attack in Douma, but doesn't the president's policy allow the mass murder of women and children to continue as long as it's carried out with conventional weapons and not chemical weapons?
Well, I think that's just a very unfair question. In what respect are you asking that?
Well, what I'm saying is that we are saying that any use of chemical weapons we're going to respond to, but we're not saying that about conventional weapons, and Assad has slaughtered hundreds of thousands of his people. Why are we drawing a distinction and saying to Assad it's okay to do it with conventional weapons, but we're going to object if you do it with chemical weapons?
I don't think we've ever said it's okay, period. There is no way that any American or the president would ever say it's okay to kill women and children. I think that we have a lot of issues in the world, and I think we're trying to put out as many fires as we can. We can't control what a country does to its people. We can condemn it. We can acknowledge it. We can try and do everything at the United Nations. I think what you've seen is the president has used a lot of sanctions, whether it's been in Venezuela, whether it's been related to Syria, whether it's related to Russia and human rights. There's been a lot of things that we have done and taken action. We've never sat back and watched bad things happen. We do wait and use military force as a last response to that. But we've always acted in every way related to every incident in some form just to let them know how much the United States condemns it.
I want to ask you about U.S. actions and how we are responding, though, when it comes to the displacement and the torture of the Syrian people. I want you to look at some State Department numbers on how many refugees have come into this country over the last 3 years. In 2016, more than 15,000 Syrian refugees came into this country. Last year, 3,000. So far this year, 11. On humanitarian grounds, how do you justify that?
Well, I will tell you, we have spent well over $6 billion on the Syrian conflict. I personally went to the refugee sites in both Jordan and Turkey. I spent time with refugees, whether they were in camps or whether they were out, and I talked to them about the situation at hand. I will tell you, from a humanitarian standpoint, the United States has been a massive donor to this situation, but also when I talk to the refugees, what I talk to them about, they want to go home. And there's a mountain that they look over, and they know that it's on the other side, and they know that Syria is in shambles, and they are prepared to rebuild it. But not one of the many that I talked to ever said we want to go to America. They want to stay as close to Syria as they can, so that when, God willing, this fighting stops, and when there's finally stability and peace in that area, they want to go rejoin their family members. They want to go back to what they remember. The kids talked about where they used to play and what they used to do. The adults talked about the fact that that's where they were born, that's where they were raised. There was a real emotional string to Syria, and I think we need to be conscious of the fact that's really where they want to go.
Let's talk about the overall strategy for Syria, because a couple of weeks ago, President Trump talked about a very fast pullout of our troops there. Take a look.
We're knocking the hell out of ISIS. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon.
President Trump reportedly wanted to get all 2,000 U.S. troops out within 48 hours and had to be persuaded by folks at the Pentagon to keep them there for a couple of months, which raises the question, what is our goal in Syria and what is our strategy to get there?
Well, I can tell you, because I was in the National Security Council meetings with the president when it came to discussing Russia, and he had three major goals that he wanted to accomplish. He, one, wanted to make sure that chemical weapons were not used, or weapons of mass destruction were not used in any way that could harm American national interest. He wanted to make sure that we defeated ISIS completely and wholly, to make sure that all of that threat was gone, because it is a threat to American national interest. And he wanted to make sure that we had good grounds to watch what Iran was doing, and they weren't making a lot of aggressive headway in terms of that, because Iran is a national threat to American interests. And so I think that, no, he never thought he'd get out in 48 hours. Yes, it is all of our goal to see American troops come home, but we're not going to leave until we know we have accomplished those things. What he has done is talk to our allies and said they need to step up more. They need to do more. And it shouldn't just be us doing it. And I think that's the right approach. But be very clear. If we leave, when we leave, it will be because we know that everything is moving forward. We're very invested in the political process in Geneva. We're very invested on a political solution, and those talks continue.
One area where there has been a dramatic escalation in the last week has been in the direct verbal attacks by the administration on Russian President Putin. Here's a tweet from President Trump this week. President Putin, Russia, and Iran are responsible for backing animal Assad. And here you are at the UN.
History will record that on this day, Russia chose protecting a monster over the lives of the Syrian people.
Ambassador, has our relationship with Putin and Russia changed this week?
Well, I think it's been changing over time. This is a very strained time between the United States and Russia. I mean, if you look at what Russia is doing, they continue to be involved with all the wrong actors. I mean, whether it's their involvement in Ukraine, whether you look at how they're supporting Maduro in Venezuela, whether you look in Syria and their way of propping up Assad and working with Iran, that continues to be a problem. I mean, there's multiple issues that we have with Russia right now and what they're doing, whether it's the chemical weapons use in Great Britain. That was another issue. So what we're doing is we're letting Russia know this is not something that we want to be a part of. It's not something we're going to tolerate, and they've got to make a decision. Right now, they don't have very good friends, and right now the friends that they do have are causing them harm. I think they're feeling that, whether it's been with the fact that we've sanctioned just recently the Russian oligarchs, which made their stock market plummet, whether it's the fact that we gave arms to Ukraine, which makes them realize that their life is about to get harder in that region, whether it's us sending 60 spies home to let them know that we're not going to put up with you using a chemical agent anywhere, or whether it's the sanctions that are continuing to happen, which you'll see again on Monday, that lets them know this is not good behavior. So everything that has strained this relationship has been on the side of Russia. The military strikes did not have to happen if Russia had not covered for Assad. 6 times they vetoed chemical weapons resolutions related to Syria. And this last resolution that they had, they only had 3 votes out of 15. The international community is telling Russia that either you make a decision on how you act and when you act, or the rest of us will make a decision in isolating you.
So in 15 seconds, how would you characterize U.S. relations with Putin and Russia right now?
Very strained right now, but our hope is always to make sure we can get a better relationship with Russia. It's in our best national interest to do that, but we're not going to put up bad behavior to get it.
Ambassador Haley, thank you. Thanks for taking the time with all you've got going on right now. We'll stay on top of the latest developments.
Great. Thanks so much.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the situation in Syria and where the U.S. are out.
Without material interference from Syria. I'd use 3 words to describe this operation: precise, overwhelming, and effective.
Lieutenant General Kenneth McKenzie, director of the Joint Staff at the Pentagon, describing Friday's strikes on Syria. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Jonah Goldberg of the National Review and author of the new book, Suicide of the West. Charles Lane of the Washington Post, Fox News national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin doing double duty today, and former press secretary to Vice President Pence, Mark Lotter. Jen, let's start with the strike. There are reports that there was some dissension, even a battle inside the president's war cabinet, that Ambassador Haley and the new National Security Advisor Bolton wanted a tougher, more aggressive response, that Defense Secretary Mattis wanted, quote, a show strike, and that he prevailed with the president. Is that true? Was there a difference in terms of how they should respond on Friday night?
I think there's a natural tension between the Pentagon officials, Defense Secretary Mattis being in the lead, and other national security officials. The Defense Department doesn't want to broaden this. They want to know, when they go in and present their options, they want to know, what is the strategy? Are we now going to step into the Syrian civil war? What are the chances of hitting Russian bases or Iranian troops? I mean, they're all interlaced there. So I think what Secretary Mattis pushed back on was anything that was broader that was going to suggest regime change. They obviously, all of the top leadership at the Pentagon has a lot of experience with regime change, and it has not gone well in either Libya or Iraq.
Jonah, I want to pick up on the president's tweet, mission accomplished. And he responded today saying, I was talking about military terms, not political terms. He is the commander-in-chief, but obviously it does have a political resonance. What is the mission, and what did we accomplish?
I think it remains unclear. I mean, I thought your question to Nikki Haley, and I should fully disclose my wife works for Nikki Haley, was very interesting in the sense that she didn't have a great answer to the question of, well, is it okay for Assad to slaughter civilians with conventional weapons, but we're going to step in with if you use chemical weapons, which I think is very small solace to the victims of Assad. And I think in many ways the mission here was in some ways defined by the fact that we had video. I mean, Nikki Haley at the UN said there have been 50 other chemical weapons uses, which we did not respond to. And I think that one of the things that Donald Trump has made clear is that when there's video of kids suffering, he responds to that. That's his red line. I'm not sure that is a super coherent strategy going forward, because first of all, it lets Assad continue to wipe out his domestic enemies, and it doesn't really change the status quo on the ground.
No, and she did not even commit that if there were other chemical weapons attacks that the U.S. would necessarily strike. She said it depends. So it isn't even a red line when it comes to chemical weapons attacks. It comes to chemical weapons attacks that
have video attached. I think that might be the case.
All right, here's what President Trump said announcing the attack on Friday night.
The evil and the despicable attack left mothers and fathers, infants and children thrashing in pain and gasping for air. These are not the actions of a man. They are crimes of a monster instead.
But I want to pick up on this discussion that I had with the ambassador, I just had with Jonah. The president seems to be saying, one, that if it's conventional weapons, it's okay, we're going to accept it. Maybe not it's okay, but we're not going to do anything about it. If it's chemical weapons, we will. And to further slice the meat, it depends on how bad a chemical weapons attack. Can you argue that it is a reasonable policy to say, look, we are not going to get sucked into this civil war, we're not going to get on the ground, we're not going to stop all the slaughter, but we are going to enforce the principle no chemical weapons?
If we have a policy, that must be it, because that is the only political objective that is even conceivably related to this strike. And of course the strike, the general described it in very glowing terms, but it's very limited. 3 targets. They made sure the Russians were safely out of the way before they engaged in it. So it was a, I guess if we used to use that term pinprick strike, maybe it's a little more than that, but it's not some kind of overwhelming attack. And at the same time, it's extremely ironic. We have a president who came into office talking about America first, very contemptuous of the alliances and international law that entangles the United States. And yet this use of military force, now the second one he's done in Syria, has been to uphold a humanitarian international norm. I happen to think that's a norm worth upholding, actually, that you shouldn't use chemical weapons against civilian populations. But it is not, interestingly, it's not what he came into office to do. And I think that's why there's going to be continuing tension. His instincts are to get out, and as he said, let other people handle this. But he has now committed to this minimal objective in Syria, which is whatever else happens, you're not going to do it with chemical weapons.
So, Mark, you have heard criticism of the president's actions, his tweets, his strategy. As the former top advisor to Vice President Pence, your response?
I think the one thing we need to note is that this is a different attack than what we saw last year. This last year was mostly focused on the delivery and the methods used to deliver the weapons. This time, they took the additional step by reducing Syria's ability to produce the weapons, and so it was a targeted response to degrade their ability to use these weapons in the future, and not just how they deliver them like they did last year. So I think it was a furthering of reducing the likelihood that we're going to see attacks like this in the future. There will be residuals. We can't guarantee that they won't have any left, but this definitely degrades that capability.
What do you think of the criticism of the lack of a strategy and the idea that it's okay is the wrong word, I'm going to stop saying it, that we will turn a blind eye to the slaughter of hundreds of thousands, maybe 500,000 civilians, unless it's chemical weapons and unless there's video of it that the president sees?
I think that's where you do find that broader issue there in terms of, are we going to get drawn into a civil war? Are we going to get into regime change, nation building, which is what